Your lawyer should be a partner in your business, and that I cannot stress enough. So if you approach a lawyer and they feel scary to you, walk away, look for somebody new. When you approach an attorney, I typically find that the best attorney to approach is someone that you found from your network or that you've met somewhere or heard. And even if you know a lawyer who practices in a different area and you know and respect them, ask them for a recommendation for your specific type of business.
Hey Hatchlings, welcome to the Motion Hatch podcast. I'm your host, Hayley Akins. Hey, thanks so much for joining me for this extra special episode of the Motion Hatch podcast. I'm so excited because we're celebrating the launch of the Freelance contract bundle. This is a project I've been working on for a while. I'm sure most of you have heard of it by now. So I'm really excited. If you head over to motionhatch.com/contract, you can find more information there. Now, on today's show, we're chatting to Jamie Lieberman, and she actually helped me make the US version of the contract. So it was so cool to talk to her. And if you're based in the UK, we did some UK podcasts with Sylvia Baumgart, who made the UK version of the bundle. So if you go to motionhatch.com/podcast, you can go to episodes 14 and 15. You can find those episodes there. If you're listening on launch week, which will be from the 8th of October, we've got special bonuses for you. You actually get to join some live Q&As with Sylvia and Jamie the week after. So if you grab the bundle this week, you get to ask them all of your questions live. It's always great to actually talk to the people who made it. So we're going to be giving away that bonus just for the first launch week. So if you're listening in the future, you can still grab the bundle, but those bonuses won't be available. So yeah, I head over to motionhatch.com/contract to get more info, sign up to our mail list to join the workshops and things like that. I can't wait to speak to you all about it. Now, a quick disclaimer before we get into the show. This podcast is for general guidance only and discusses legal position in the US at the time of publication, unless stated otherwise. You must take legal advice and not rely on the information provided in this podcast before taking action. We do not update our podcast, and therefore past podcasts may not reflect the current legal position. So that's enough from me. Let's get into the show. Hey, Jamie, thanks so much for coming on the podcast.
Thanks for having me.
So I just wanted to start by asking you a bit about your background and what you do.
Well, I'm a lawyer. I'm a partner and a founder of a law firm in the US called #Legal. And we specialize in working with content creators and creatives and service professionals. A lot of our clients we find are in the online space as well.
Cool. So how did you get started doing that?
Oh my gosh, that's a long story that I'm not going to bore your listeners with. But basically, I've been a lawyer for a long time, almost 15 years. I started my career as kind of your typical litigator. And then I realized that wasn't really quite the right path for me. So along the way, I was a blogger for years. I lived and worked in New York City, and I blogged about living in New York, and I loved it. As the years went on, I started noticing that in the blogging world, people were starting to make money blogging. And so I realized that there's probably something really interesting in the business area of the business of blogging. This was about 6 or 7 years ago. And I started working for a blogging company, helping them out with their conferences. And the founder of that company just said, "Hey, you think you could talk about legal issues for bloggers?" And I was like, "Sure, I think I could do that." So I gave my first talk, and I realized there was a huge need in the blogging industry for an attorney who sort of understood what it meant to have a business as a blog. This was long before there was the term influencer, anything like that. And then once I started the law firm, I met my business partner. I have a partner in the practice. Once I met her, the law firm sort of exploded, and it turned into a lot of other areas that sort of naturally stemmed out of blogging, which was working with anybody that's creating content or creating anything, any kind of creative, whether it's photography, design, interior design. We have illustrators, things like that. And so it sort of just went hand in hand. And now we have a law practice that's full time with staff.
That's awesome. So how can lawyers help motion designers with their businesses?
So typically what I find in working with motion designers, and we have some that are clients, is a lot of what is facing a motion designer, particularly one that is working freelance or has their own business, is making sure they have really great contracts in place. There's often a lot of intellectual property considerations, particularly in the copyright area, sometimes with trademarks as well, but it tends to be pretty copyright heavy. And just sort of making sure that a motion designer forms an entity if necessary. Many of the typical sort of issues that face anybody who's starting up a small business. But then I think the specifics for motion designers really comes down to that really good contract and having an understanding of who owns what is being created.
Yeah, that makes sense. So you mentioned a bit about forming an entity and things like that. Do you want to go into that a little bit?
Sure. So my recommendation is always this. If you're out on your own and you're generating income and even if it's a side business or you may have another full-time business, whatever the case may be, if you're generating income, it's important that you form a business in order to protect your personal assets. It's not that difficult to do in the US. The easiest entity to form is called an LLC or a limited liability company. Each state sort of has its own requirements, although they are not that difficult to form. There are other entities you can form, and those are all very specific to each individual. This is sort of just general information. You can form corporations, and there's different reasons for doing that. But for the sort of standard freelancer who's looking to either work on projects or long-term projects, an LLC typically works. And the benefits of that are, if you correctly form your LLC, your business is separate from your personal. So if there is an issue, there is a lawsuit, something does come up that sort of no one ever wants to think about, your personal assets are protected because only your LLC or business assets would be at issue for that dispute.
Yeah, I think that's the same as a limited company here, I believe.
I think it's very similar, yeah.
Yeah, so I think the option is like a sole proprietor, right? And that's like not a separate entity from you, right?
Exactly. If you go out there and you start doing business and somebody pays you, you're automatically a sole proprietor. It doesn't really offer anything other than you probably get a 1099 and you'd have to deal with it from a tax perspective, but there's nothing that protects your personal assets if you're just working as a sole proprietor. Same with partnerships. So say you and a friend decided you wanted to start a motion design business and you got together. Just merely having a partnership also is not any kind of entity that would protect you. And in that case, I always, and I didn't mention this before, but it's really important if you are working with a friend or someone who's not your friend, just someone that you've met and you want to work together, that you have a really good agreement between the two of you. So a sole proprietor or a partnership, neither of those have any kind of liability protections the way an LLC does.
So if someone started their own small studio and they wanted to hire other designers, is there anything they need to consider there as well?
Yeah, so that's another really important area for contracts as well. You want to make sure that if you are hiring people, whether as an employee or an independent contractor, that you have some sort of agreement in writing about your relationship. And a lot of what that involves is the deliverables that are going to be expected. This is more for an independent contractor. An employee is a little bit different. That will vary state by state. You want to make sure you understand deliverables, payment terms, who owns the intellectual property of what's being created. Sometimes non-competes or non-solicitation clauses, meaning the person you're hiring, they can't compete with you, take your customers, they can't solicit your customers. There's a lot that can go into that contract, and it's really important to have at least a basic one because it protects everybody.
Yeah, that makes so much sense. I mean, I think when I talk to a lot of motion designers, the big thing about contracts that comes up is how can they give their clients that, and will they get any pushback, and kind of how contracts work in the real world. Because I think they just think like, oh, you know, they're not going to want to sign my contract and all this stuff. Do you have anything to kind of speak towards that?
So my biggest advice, I hear this every day, every single day. And my biggest piece of advice is this. If you present a contract to a potential client or someone who's going to be working with you and they push back and tell you they don't want a contract, that's a gift because that is a red flag. Anybody who doesn't want to sign a contract, that is almost always an indicator that there's going to be an issue later. And so you can be grateful when they say to you, I don't want to sign that, because you're essentially not going to have to deal with all the troubles that will happen later. Anybody who's in business, anybody who has any baseline understanding of professionalism and doing business knows that contracts are a big part of that. So while it may seem scary, I've never had anybody come back to me and say that a really legitimate paying customer or even a legitimate independent contractor has pushed back on a contract. It's just one of those parts of doing business.
Yeah, I think that's really good advice. And I think another thing that comes along with that is, if I want to give my contract to my client and they have their own contract, like how does that work? And do you have to negotiate terms? How does that work?
Sure. So it really doesn't matter who the contract comes from, because as long as you're both sort of a part of negotiating those terms, it really doesn't matter. So if your client would prefer to use theirs, I would say if you read it and there are parts you don't understand or you're concerned about, either talk to your client about it, or if you have an attorney, have your attorney take a look at it and make sure that everything looks okay. I do that in my practice all the time, where I have clients will come to me and say, hey, my client or somebody I'm working with wants to use their contract. I'm like, great, I'll take a look. And 9 times out of 10, there's probably going to be some changes to it. I mean, typically there's a back and forth with contracts. Very rarely is a contract that's goes back and forth just signed as is, because, one side always sort of favors themselves and we want to make it as fair as possible. So there's nothing wrong with a back and forth. There's nothing wrong with requesting a change to something that makes you uncomfortable. Your client or the person that you're working with is never going to shut down a deal because you request a change. They may decline your change, and then you'll have a decision that you'll need to make whether that change is important enough to, break the deal. But the fact is, negotiation is just a very big part of any kind of business transaction, and it shouldn't be adversarial. It should be very collaborative. And if it is, it gets done.
Yeah, that's what I think. And I always think about contracts. A good thing is that you're kind of showing your client that you're professional and it matters to you to kind of protect yourself and protect them as well.
I couldn't agree with you more. It definitely gives a legitimacy to your business. It makes your client realize that you are a professional, and it protects both sides. It doesn't just protect one side, it protects everybody.
Yeah, and there's a couple of things that always come up, like people always want to be like, can I charge for my project files and things like that? And I'm always like, you can, but did you have that in a contract? And then they're like, no. And I'm like, well, then you can't, because, you could try and negotiate, I guess, but it's always better to kind of, I feel like, to set things out up front with people rather than kind of leave it till afterwards.
Yeah, because then there's no surprises, and there's comfort in no surprises, right?
Yeah, definitely. Do you think that we should be thinking about trademarking our business names as well? If we're like a small studio, we have like a name that isn't our own name.
It depends. I always laugh. That's like my typical lawyer answer. I'm always saying, it depends. But in trademarking, it really does. It just depends on how you want to use your name. If you're using your name outside of your local geographical area, if you are becoming more and more well-known, if you're putting products out there, if there's something very unique you're doing, if you want to make sure that no one else can use the name that you're using attached to the services that you're providing, then yeah, trademarking definitely can make sense. For some people who are just providing services who are either using their own name, or even if they're using like a trade name or a name that isn't their own, sometimes it makes sense and sometimes it doesn't. And so my recommendation for trademarks in particular in the United States is you must talk to a lawyer about that. It is a very nuanced area of law. It's one of those areas I wouldn't recommend trying to do yourself, but you can definitely have a consult with an attorney who will sort of talk you through it. And that attorney should be able to tell you whether or not it makes sense to trademark your name.
Yeah, I think that's great advice. And also, a lot of motion designers are always like, but lawyers are scary and things like that. So I just wanted to ask you about, if we like approach the lawyers, what kind of things should we be asking them? And for motion designers, do you think there's like a particular type of lawyer they should get in contact with?
So lawyers should not be scary. We've met, Haley, right? I'm not scary.
No, you're definitely not scary. That's why we're working together.
Exactly. And I understand there is a really sort of, unfortunately, somewhat true stereotype about attorneys. And I think a number of attorneys are trying to change that, myself included. Your lawyer should be a partner in your business. And that I cannot stress enough. So if you approach a lawyer and they feel scary to you, walk away, look for somebody new. When you approach an attorney, I typically find that the best attorney to approach is someone that you found from your network or that you've met somewhere or heard. And even if you know a lawyer who practices in a different area and you know and respect them, ask them for a recommendation for your specific type of business. For a motion designer, you definitely want an attorney who has experience with intellectual property, not just a small business lawyer who can help you with some of the things. But if you're looking for a lawyer who can sort of do all of it, you really need a lawyer who understands the nuances of copyright and trademark because that's such a big part of your business. Having someone who can write contracts as well is a very big bonus. And typically those lawyers can and will form entities. I'm less concerned about that. You can sort of find a lawyer to form an entity fairly easily. It's really the contracts and the intellectual property that I'd be looking for when you met an attorney. And if you can find one that specializes in creatives, that's a plus because they'll understand your business. You shouldn't be paying an attorney to explain to them about your business. They should have an understanding of it and they should be able to pretty quickly catch on to what your needs are. So if you're finding yourself uncomfortable, not wanting to pick up the phone, the attorney's not emailing you back, like anybody else, I'd end that relationship and look for somebody new.
Yeah, that's great advice. So can you explain what intellectual property is and what we should be thinking about?
Sure. So when I use the term intellectual property, it actually refers to three things. It refers to copyright, it refers to trademarks, and it refers to patents. I do not specialize in patents, so that is not something I ever talk about. However, I have amazing patent attorneys that I refer people to. So if anybody listening needs a patent attorney, I know some really great ones and can refer you to them. My area of focus in my law practice is copyrights and trademark. And it's typically, there's two ways we do it. Trademarks is definitely trademark registration. There's a lot that goes into that. It's also trademark prosecution. So making sure if you have a trademark, someone is not infringing on it. And the work that you're doing doesn't infringe on somebody else's. So we advise clients about that. Copyright is all about who owns what's created. And typically, in a contractual type of relationship, there's a lot of different ways that copyright can go. Sometimes clients will want what's called a work for hire, and that just means that they own everything that you create. And you want to make sure that what they're owning is the finished final product, not drafts, not things you've discarded, but just the finished final product. You assign copyright to the client. They can do whatever they want with it, and that's the end. That's the one that typically motion designers get paid the most money for because it's a premium to sort of assign that copyright. There's other ways that you can work with copyright and who owns the content or the design that's created or whatever's created for your client is you, the motion designer, can keep the copyright, but can license the copyright to your client, meaning your client can do certain things with what you've created, but not everything. And so that's a way that motion designers can control what ultimately happens with their work. And you have to just make sure that you sort of carefully draft what that license looks like to make sure that your client isn't doing something with the work you don't want them to. And the other way with copyright is advising people to make sure that they're not violating somebody else's copyright. That's an important one too.
Yeah, so that makes sense. So it's kind of like almost if you're giving away like all of your copyright so they could just go and use, I don't know, I always say the example of like you're doing a character animation and then they can just use all the characters and everything. You kind of don't want to be doing that really, because then they could just pull out a character and put it on like a billboard or something as well. We just want to be giving them the rights to use just the animation to go on YouTube or to like market their website or whatever the example is.
Exactly. Now, if your client wants to use that character, there's nothing wrong with that. They should just pay to be able to use that character however they want. So if you're being compensated for that character appearing on a billboard, then that's great. But you just want to make sure that the compensation matches what the client is getting.
Yeah, that makes sense. And like you say, sometimes it's a bit different when you have this like work for hire thing, which I think is more like you're sort of doing something for them and they want it to own everything. And how would you explain the differences between that?
So essentially, with a copyright comes a number of different rights. There's like the right to display, there's the right to publish, there's something called the right to create derivative works, which means creating one work out of another work. The best example of that is the Harry Potter movies are a derivative work of the Harry Potter books. And so pulling that character out of the animation and then putting that character on a billboard would be like a derivative work in your example, because you're taking some portion of what was created and then making it into something else. And so that typically is the one that a lot of people want to be aware of. And a lot of times, if a motion designer, say, create something for a client, keeps the copyright for themselves, but licenses certain aspects, like the right to display on a YouTube channel is what you're talking about, a right to maybe publish on a website, but they may keep the derivative work for themselves. The motion designer keeps that right to themselves. If you think about it, I learned this in law school and it always makes me giggle, as like a bundle of sticks. You can give as many or sell as many of those sticks as you want, and you can also keep as many as you want. And so that's sort of the way that it works. And licensing is fairly complicated. We'll keep it as simple as possible, but there's ways that you can sell licenses that you can take back, like a revocable license. One that's exclusive versus not exclusive, meaning only your client gets the license to this, or you could use it and license it to other clients. So there's lots that goes into how that license is written when you're not doing a work for hire. And it's just important that you, as a motion designer, understand how to read those clauses so you know exactly what you're giving and selling.
So if you are doing a work for hire, then it means generally they will own all the intellectual property.
Yes, they own everything. You have nothing left of that.
Okay. I don't know how to follow that up. Like, it's hard to recommend what people do. I guess it's just up to them, isn't it?
I think the best recommendation really is just make sure you're being compensated for what you're selling or giving away. That's all. Like, I definitely have clients who have their own clients who want works made for hire. There's nothing wrong with that, but they charge a premium. They may double their rate for that. As long as the compensation makes sense for what they're getting, it's an okay thing to do, as long as it fits with your business practices and you're comfortable with it. There's nothing wrong with it. Just, make sure you're getting paid.
Cool. So do you have any stories from working with creatives that when having a contract has been vital to them?
I have an awesome story. This is a story I love to tell. So I had a client who's a content creator, and she was working with a company to create some images for them and some writings for them. And these would be not only posted on her client's website, but they were also going to be posted on her website. And she was going to be talking about this for sort of a long term. And she noticed in her contract, there was what was called an exclusivity provision, meaning she was only able to work with this client and none of the client's competitors for a certain amount of time. And she didn't notice it. And we flagged it for her. And she's like, whoa, that really could very much limit the number of other clients I may be able to have if I can't work with any of their competitors. And so she went back to the client and she doubled her rate. And she said, look, if you want this in, you're going to have to pay me double because I'm essentially foregoing other potential compensation. They didn't even blink. They said yes. So if we hadn't have flagged that for her, if she hadn't have noticed it, she wouldn't have been compensated correctly for that exclusivity. And when she did, they said, great, no problem. Of course, that's really important to us. We didn't know you didn't build that into your pricing. Good to go. So that's one of my favorite contracts.
Yeah, that's really interesting. That's something that I don't think people think about that much. I guess it doesn't happen very often, but you want to make sure you know about it when it does.
Well, I think it's just an example. Like, I imagine exclusivity isn't a huge issue in your world, although there might be some non-competes or non-solicitation clauses in there that you wouldn't necessarily, particularly a non-compete, that could be a big deal. The lesson of that story is just ask. She was so nervous to go back to them. I mean, it was not as plain and simple. We had to really coach her through it. And we said, they're not going to take the contract away just because you're telling them that this is, that wasn't included in your pricing. And the same could go for the work made for hire. Your client may just have it as a standard clause in their contract. And if you go to them and you say, look, I don't really do works made for hire. I really do it on the licensing. They may say, oh yeah, no problem. You'd be shocked. And so I think that's really what the lesson is just ask. No one's ever going to stop working with you because you ask, as long as you do it in a very professional, collaborative way.
Yeah, I think that's really important. And I get questions a lot about all types of business questions. And I'm always like, why don't you just ask the client? Like, just communicate with them. And the amount of times people are like, no, but then they'll say no, or, like people are afraid to negotiate. But, it's not a horrible thing. It's just that's like what business is like, and just trying to communicate what you want out of something and what they want. And you kind of come to an agreement.
That's exactly right. It never, ever, ever hurts. I'm in my many, many years of practice, I've never heard of a deal going away because someone asked. The deal may go away because of the answer, which isn't a bad thing. Saying no to deals is not bad. It has to be the right deal. You can't just take deals just because you're getting deals, because you'll end up resenting that client and it won't make sense for you. So while it may seem great in the short term, in the long term, those deals, the ones that, you don't feel right about, or there's questions about it and you don't ask, you just get frustrated. As a person who also has a client services business, I understand how that goes. There are clients that come to me that I turn down because I know we're not going to be the right fit. And that's a good thing.
Yeah, that's so important. Do you have any stories where things haven't gone so well and you've maybe had to pick up the pieces?
Oh gosh, yes. So I had a client she had a client and she had known them for a really long time. They were really good friends. And she had been doing work. She was a freelance writer. And so she did freelance writing for this company for years. And then about 6 months before she contacted me, the company started to become slow to pay. So it would be, she got paid a monthly retainer. The monthly retainer was paid a month and a half late. And then it was late. And then it was late. And then all of a sudden she was owed 3 months. And it wasn't a small amount. It was in the 5-figure range. And she came to me and she's like, look, I feel really awkward and I'm not sure really what to do, but I need to get paid. And I've been working for them. They've been promising payment. I said, no problem. I can reach out to them, see if I can have a conversation. I said, just send me your contract and show me your invoices. And then there was silence. She didn't have a contract because she had been friends with them and had worked with them for a while. She didn't have any invoices. And I said, I want to help you. I'm going to do the best I can, but it's going to take me double the amount of time to put together any kind of demand, because we have to show proof that they actually owe you. And we did. And she did get paid part of it. But what ended up happening was she spent all this time and money on me trying to put something together because I just didn't have the contract or the invoices that I needed. I was scraping together a demand letter from like screenshots of Skype messages and Skype calls and emails. And it just took me a really long time. And so it would have been a lot cleaner and faster if she would have had a contract. And now she and I have a deal that she never, ever enters into any agreements, even with a best friend, unless she has a contract in place.
Yeah, that's amazing that she didn't have any invoices even.
It was...
That's surprising to me.
Yeah, they were friends. It happens all the time. You'd be shocked at the number of people who are like, oh, but it's my closest friend. I've seen it with family members. People fight. Things go wrong. This company, they wanted to pay her. They had fallen on hard times. And so, they were paying some people, not others. They sort of took advantage of her because they knew her. It was uncomfortable, but it's very common. So just document everything. It's really important.
Yeah. So is there any important things that we definitely shouldn't be missing out of a contract?
I think one of the big important things for motion designers is definitely the deliverables. What's required, what materials you're getting from the client, what materials you're providing the client. I think that intellectual property, like we've talked so much about, the copyright, that's really important. Making sure that the timeline is set, making sure that if your client has delays, that's not put on you. So if they don't get back to you within a certain amount of time, that your timeline can be adjusted, that's really important as well. Just knowing that you sort of have everything all set and that your contingencies are covered as well as your clients.
Yeah, I think that makes so much sense. And it's like things that we don't think about, like statements of work and deliverables, like you say, and client materials. That's something that I've like just learned about. So, like defining say that they're going to give you a voiceover or they're going to give you sound design and things like that, because then you're like not liable if they like steal some music or something and then they give it to you and they promise that,
Yeah.
they can use it, things like that. I could see that coming up a lot.
Yeah, music's a big one. A lot of people don't understand licensing in music and they think, oh, it's just music played on the radio. Why can't I put it in this video? You can't unless you license it correctly. So it's really important, and it protects the motion designer to know in the contract that if there is an issue, the motion designer is not on the hook for using the materials provided by the client.
Yeah. And another question I think comes up a lot is, can we use music that's commercial in our show reels, which is technically not. It's like the same thing, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think as long as you've gotten permission from your client, you're talking about your portfolio.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think as long as you've gotten permission from your client to use that, fully knowing that they had permission, it starts to get complicated in the layers. You just have to make sure that you have permission to use whatever music you're using.
Yeah, so you can't just take like any commercial music and just put it on your show reel and like put all your clips together, and
I wouldn't do that.
Yeah, you have to I always recommend people going to like royalty-free sites, because there's some good stuff out there now and it's not like too expensive to buy music and stuff.
That's the most important thing, is buy the music. Don't go to the free sites. I know what you're saying with royalty-free, where it's sort of like one download, like just a flat fee to download and use. But make sure that you're not just taking, like a lot of people used to do this with stock photos, and you can get in a lot of trouble with that. Even if it says it's free and you can use it for free, I would recommend finding a place that's affordable and paying that so that you're covered just in case.
Yeah, definitely. There's some good ones out there that aren't too expensive.
Yeah, like Shutterstock, I think, has some good music that's not too expensive.
Is Shutterstock more like images? I think it's...
Shutterstock does.
Cool.
Right. Yeah, you can totally do it. It's royalty free. There you go.
Shutterstock. Oh, that's good. I didn't know that they did music as well. Check that out.
I swore, because I have a producer for my podcast who was sending us music, and I was like, no kidding, Shutterstock. Yeah, it was pretty good too.
That's good. Well, that's a good new one that I can tell people. Cool. So is there anything else that we should know as motion designers, I guess people based in the US, what they should be thinking about?
I think we've overloaded everyone with information, Haley.
Probably. I tend to do that.
I know, we don't want to scare them. No, I think we covered most of it. I think the best thing to do is to sort of just have a lawyer in your back pocket that you know and you're comfortable with, that you can just call them when you have an issue. And as long as you have that, then you sort of know that you're covered. And there's nothing wrong with setting up like a half an hour with an attorney, walk them through your business, tell them everything about what you're doing, and they should be able to sort of talk to you about some of the things that might be able to help you as well. And that's not hopefully it wouldn't be too much. It's a small investment just to spend a little bit of time with an attorney, and that just gives some good peace of mind.
Yeah, awesome. So if there's one piece of advice that you think the audience should take away from this, what would that be?
Don't be afraid of contracts.
Yeah, I think that's good advice.
They're your friends. Contracts are your friends.
Cool. Well, thanks so much for coming on the show.
Thanks for having me. This was fun.
Thanks again to Jamie for coming on the podcast. That was really great. So much awesome and valuable information in there. Now, a lot of the stuff we spoke about, we actually included in the freelance contract bundle. So if you're interested, please do go to motionhatch.com/contract and you can find more information about it there. And if you have any questions about the contract bundle or anything else, you can always email me at hello@motionhatch.com. I always like talking to you guys, and I really, really want to help you out, with the contract bundle or anything else that I can help with. So please do email me, just say hi, ask me any questions you might have. I love chatting to you all. So thanks so much for sticking around till the end of the episode. See you next time.